Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
On that Monday night, David and Emily's home was wrapped in a calm silence, as if every corner was filled with a temporary peace. The children were already asleep, and the couple, after another ordinary day, settled into their personal routines. David was leaning back in bed, absorbed in a mystery novel, diving into the nuances of an intriguing plot. Across the room, Emily focused on her laptop screen, working out the details of an article about digital marketing strategies. It was just another night, like so many others, with each of them absorbed in their own activities. The comfort of their routine brought a sense of security. But something about that night unsettled David's heart. He began to notice that his wife seemed strangely distant, as if an invisible gap had grown between them over time. The silence, once reassuring, now felt heavy, as though there was an unseen weight in the air, something he couldn't define, pulling him into discomfort. David looked over at Emily, who kept her eyes fixed on the computer screen, fingers tapping the keyboard, but with an almost absent expression, as if she were somewhere else. Seeing her so present and yet so distant troubled him deeply. He knew something was wrong. What had been a subtle intuition now screamed inside him, pushing him to question her. Suddenly, unable to hold back, he closed his book and, without any preamble, asked the question burning in his mind. The words came out before he even realized it. "Emily, are you seeing someone else?" It was a blunt, raw question that cut through the bedroom air like a blade. Emily's face went pale. She hesitated for a moment, long enough for him to understand her answer before she said anything at all. Her expression combined surprise and guilt, a look he never imagined he'd see on the wife with whom he had shared his life for so many years. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out right away. She looked away, her shoulders sagged, and at that moment David had the painful certainty that what he feared was true. Emily took a deep breath and, with a trembling voice, confessed. She admitted that she'd become emotionally involved with someone else. She tried to downplay it, calling it something superficial and unimportant, as if that could lessen David's pain at that moment. But every word seemed to deepen the wound, making that instant even more intense and harder to bear. The idea that someone, however insignificant, had crossed the lines of their relationship was unimaginable to David. The once cozy bedroom became suffocating, and the previously tranquil atmosphere turned into almost tangible tension. The silence between Emily's sentences weighed like lead. David stayed quiet, trying to absorb what he'd heard, staring into space while disbelief, anger, and sadness flooded his mind. He felt the ground under his feet give way, as if the foundation of his life were splitting apart irreversibly. It was as if the most innocent and trusting part of him were being ripped away without mercy. Without another word, David stood up. His breathing was heavy and slow, as though every movement demanded enormous effort. He looked deeply at Emily, the pain in his eyes clear. He calmly but firmly asked her to sleep in the guest room. It wasn't a request driven by anger or revenge, it was a quiet plea for self-protection, an attempt to build a barrier between himself and the pain he was feeling. In the days that followed, the house became a different place. A dense and heavy silence hovered in the hallways and rooms, creating an atmosphere of distance and discomfort. Emily, now in the guest room, felt the emptiness of a home that no longer welcomed her in the same way. David's words echoed in her mind, and the reality of her choice was clear in the coldness of his face as he avoided her whenever possible. It was a pain she hadn't expected to feel, sharper than guilt, born from the abyss between them, an abyss she herself had created. Seeking some form of reconciliation, maybe redemption, Emily planned something special for David. The idea came one night while she was alone in the kitchen, rummaging through a drawer of old recipes. She pulled out a worn notebook and flipped through its pages, remembering moments they'd shared over food, impromptu dinners, culinary surprises she'd prepared for birthdays and special occasions. This time, she wanted to reclaim a bit of that connection, hoping he'd see that she was willing to fight for what they'd lost. Determined, she spent hours planning and preparing a special dinner, a dish she knew was one of David's favorites. The aroma gradually filled the kitchen, wrapping the space in a familiar, comforting warmth. Emily thought of every detail: soft background music, lit candles for a more intimate atmosphere, the table set with care, just like in their early years of marriage. She tried to show, in every small touch, how much she wanted things to return to normal, that this simple dinner could be a starting point for reconnecting. When David arrived, as always, at his usual time, he wore the tired expression he had every day. Seeing the table set, he seemed to hesitate for a second. Maybe Emily caught a brief spark of surprise or nostalgia in his eyes, but it faded quickly. As he sat down, David looked at Emily with a blank expression, impossible to read. A chill ran down her spine, a sign that things wouldn't go as she'd imagined. Still, she refused to let the discomfort stop her. She served the dish with care, trying to smile, trying to show some warmth. Yet when he picked up the glass of wine she'd poured for him and, without hesitation, poured the dark liquid over the carefully prepared meal, the sound of wine hitting the plate felt like something breaking inside her. Emily froze, heart racing, watching the scene unfold. It was as if every drop represented David's pain, which he had kept silent until now and was expressing with this silent, cruel act. Without saying a single word, he looked at her, as if communicating everything he felt without needing explanations, and then got up and left her alone in the dining room, surrounded by the aroma of a ruined dinner. That night was a breaking point for Emily. She spent endless minutes sitting there, staring at the soaked plate, wondering how they'd reached this point and how a single choice had destroyed something so precious. From that moment on, she understood that symbolic gestures wouldn't be enough. She needed a definitive break with everything that had led her astray. Brian, the man she'd gotten involved with, was still part of her work environment, and even though the affair had ended, his presence lingered every time she passed him in the hallway. It was as if his presence kept the wound between her and David open. It wasn't enough to avoid Brian during breaks or to look away. To truly try to restore the shattered trust, she had to get away completely. So, she decided to request a transfer to another department. The idea of changing teams and distancing herself from Brian was a way to erase the traces of her mistake. She approached her supervisor and, after an honest conversation, explained that she needed a change, without giving too many details, but with the urgency of someone trying to fix a major slip-up. After a few days of waiting, her request was approved, and Emily felt relief knowing she wouldn't cross paths with Brian in the halls anymore. Over time, she realized that this distance was necessary not only for her own sake, but also for any chance of healing between her and David. Even with this fresh start at work, the emotional distance between Emily and David remained as vast and painful as ever. He had shut down, as if an invisible wall separated him from anything that came from her. Some days, David would pass her in the house without even lifting his eyes, keeping a silence that hurt more than any argument. Emily understood that Brian's involvement had created one of the deepest wounds in David's trust, and even though she'd ended it, she couldn't undo the impact it had caused. She still believed there was hope. In a final effort, she suggested they try couples therapy. She knew David wasn't fond of that kind of approach, but surprisingly, he agreed. That afternoon, sitting in front of the therapist, Emily felt exposed, as if her emotions were raw. She poured out her pain and regret, describing the emptiness she felt seeing what they had lost. The therapist listened patiently, with a kind but firm look, as someone who knew they needed to touch the most sensitive areas to find transformation. When it was David's turn to speak, what he said hit Emily like a blow. He spoke about the pain of being betrayed, the feeling of being left behind, how their once solid trust had shattered. Each of his words was a painful truth Emily needed to face. David made it clear that, for him, trust couldn't be restored with just words or gestures. The betrayal created a wound so deep that it was impossible to ignore. He admitted that what they had now was just a shadow of what they used to be, and that while he desired change, he wasn't sure he could forgive or if the pain would ever ease. After leaving the therapist's office, the weight of reality fell on them like a thick cloud. Emily understood that words of regret and attempts at reconciliation might never be enough to restore what they'd lost. They walked home in silence, side by side, but feeling miles apart. As days passed, Emily began to feel the crushing impact of that therapy session. What had previously felt like an open, painful wound now seemed like a deep, silent scar. They lived under the same roof, shared the same spaces, but their daily routines were almost automatic, like strangers forced to coexist to maintain a fragile normality for the children's sake. Emily tried to be an attentive mother, present at activities and school events, while David maintained his role as a dedicated, tireless father. Perhaps, to the outside world, the family still seemed intact, but to Emily, each day was a bitter reminder of the gap between them. The emotional weight never let up. Sometimes, she watched David closely, searching for any sign of closeness, any trace of the man she'd known for years, but his gaze, even when it met hers, was cold and empty, as though he saw through her without really seeing her. Lonely nights in the guest room became a painful ritual, and the echo of their silence was deafening, suffocating. Sitting alone in the darkness, Emily replayed each moment, each choice that led them to this point. Some nights, she closed her eyes and remembered when they used to laugh together, talking late into the night, those simple, warm moments that now felt as though they belonged to another life. Despite all her efforts, Emily started to sense that there might be something she couldn't change. David was wounded beyond repair, and their connection had become so fragile it sometimes seemed impossible to rebuild what they had lost. To friends, family, and even the kids, life went on as if nothing was wrong, but between the two of them, everything was fragile, just an empty shell. In the midst of all this, something new began to emerge. Emily noticed that David started going out more often. He never said where he was going or why, but he always came home late, after the children were asleep. It was as if he were building a refuge outside their home, a place to breathe away from the pain now saturating that space. Then, one night when he came home even later than usual, Emily saw something that broke her heart. As he entered, David's eyes held a gentle glow, a light she hadn't seen in a long time. He passed by her with a slight nod, like greeting an acquaintance, not the woman with whom he had shared a life. That night, Emily knew, without anyone having to say it, that there was someone else bringing that light back to his eyes, someone filling the empty space she had left. Someone who wasn't her. Lying alone, surrounded by the chill of the guest room, Emily was overcome by a bitter feeling and, at the same time, a painful recognition of her own responsibility. Days went by, and the distance between David and Emily became almost palpable, a silent divide they both maintained, maybe out of lack of options or fear that everything would collapse for good. The routine seemed rehearsed. David woke up early, made breakfast for the kids, helped with their school things, and left for work after minimal conversation. Emily did her best to fill the spaces he left behind, but every movement of both of them was cautious, as though any misstep could tear down the fragile balance. They lived like two strangers forced to share the same home for a greater reason, their children. When they were all together, they made visible efforts to show normality, occasional smiles, brief scripted phrases to avoid questions. At school events, they still sat side by side, but the once abundant conversations filled with pride and enthusiasm for the children's achievements now were reduced to the basics, devoid of emotion. Over time, though, Emily started noticing small signs of change. David became increasingly absent, his outings more frequent, and at home he got involved in activities that didn't include Emily. Deep down, she knew things were changing, but she never dared confront him. It was as if, by ignoring what was happening right before her eyes, she could pretend there was still some chance of healing. And even though she knew the distance between them was growing, Emily clung to the hope that, with time, he might forgive her. Until one Saturday afternoon, when she took the children to the park, reality struck her like a blow. David showed up after a few hours and, to her surprise, he wasn't alone. By his side was Hannah, a serene woman, her hair loose in the breeze and wearing a gentle smile, something Emily hadn't seen on David's face for months. He introduced her casually as Hannah, a friend, and Emily realized this introduction wasn't just for the children, it was also for her. A chill ran down Emily's spine as she watched their interaction. There was an effortless ease, as if they were simply comfortable with each other's company. The children, innocent and unaware of Emily's tension, accepted Hannah's presence without question, interacting with her as naturally as they would with a relative. As she observed the three of them, David, Hannah, and the kids, Emily felt like a spectator of her own life, watching a scene that should have been hers. Every time David laughed with Hannah, it opened a new wound inside Emily. The pain of that vision was almost physical, making her want to run away, yet paralyzing her. The fear that David had found comfort in someone else, someone who restored the light she herself had extinguished, was overwhelming. And at the same time, the truth she'd avoided seeing was now crystal clear: David was moving on, and she was being left behind. On the way back home, the silence between them was deafening. Emily tried not to show the pain she felt, forcing herself to smile and chat with the children as if nothing had happened. But every word was an effort, and when the kids finally went to bed, she found herself alone, sitting in the dark room, trying to process what she had just witnessed. The emptiness around her could not compare to the emptiness inside her. Accepting that this might be the start of a new chapter in David's life, one that didn't include Emily, was devastating. Sitting there, surrounded by darkness and silence, Emily finally understood that she was facing the consequences of her own choices. That night, alone in the guest room, Emily was overwhelmed by a wave of memories. She remembered all the nights she and David stayed up talking about their plans, recalling their small everyday victories and even the hardships they had overcome together. She remembered the laughter, the way he used to look at her with profound affection, the nights they held each other until they fell asleep. Now, all of that seemed to belong to a distant past, yellowed pages of an abandoned book. But now there was Hannah. The name echoed in Emily's mind like an unwanted presence. Seeing David smile with Hannah, watching them chat so naturally, brought indescribable pain. Emily never thought she would feel this kind of loneliness while he was still under the same roof, but in a way, he was already gone. In the days that followed, Emily struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy over breakfast, trying to create a light atmosphere for the children, asking them trivial questions about their day. But each time David came to the table and answered briefly, without a trace of the intimacy they once shared, she felt her heart sink a bit more. It was as if the distance between them became more obvious with every silence, an invisible line no one dared to cross. David, on the other hand, seemed increasingly comfortable with this new routine. He had become a version of himself that Emily didn't recognize, a version seemingly at peace, as though he had finally found a refuge away from the wounds of the past. He continued his regular outings and, with every "see you later" or "I'll be back soon," Emily knew he wasn't heading to some random meeting, but to moments that didn't include her, moments that now belonged to him, and possibly to Hannah. One afternoon, Emily was in the living room when she noticed a message pop up on David's phone, forgotten on the table before he left. Hannah's name appeared on the screen. In that moment, Emily's chest tightened. She knew she shouldn't look, that it would be an invasion of privacy, but curiosity mixed with the fear of losing him forever drove her to pick up the phone and read the message. It was simple, an invitation to meet at a cafe later, but its casual tone and familiarity hinted at something more intimate, confirming what Emily feared: Hannah was more than a friend. She felt a chill reading those few words, imagining all the conversations and moments they must have shared away from her eyes, every gesture of affection Emily herself had failed to offer and that another woman now provided. It tasted bitter, a mixture of regret and loss she didn't know how to handle. That night, when David returned, Emily tried to talk to him, to understand what was happening, but he dodged her attempts, keeping the conversation superficial. He seemed indifferent to the storm of emotions she felt, or maybe he chose to ignore it, building a wall so nothing else could hurt him. Each time she tried to get closer, he pulled back, and each of his responses seemed carefully measured to avoid any deep conversation. At that moment, seeing him act with such cold indifference, Emily realized that what was left between them was truly falling apart. That night, after everyone was asleep, she stayed alone in the living room, lost in thoughts heavy as anchors. The image of David and Hannah together played on a loop in her mind like an inescapable film. The pain of seeing the man she loved, with whom she'd built a life, finding comfort in another's arms, was unbearable. Now, alone with her thoughts, Emily had to face something she'd been avoiding, the truth that she herself was responsible for all of this. For so long, she ignored the signs of wear in their relationship, assuming the love they built was indestructible, immune to human flaws. She allowed herself the illusion that her remorse and words would be enough to undo the damage. But now, seeing David move on with someone else, she understood how much she'd underestimated his pain and the depth of her betrayal. Every choice she'd made, every small lie she told herself about the meaning of her mistake, now haunted her. In the solitude, Emily remembered how it all began, how she and David met, the love they shared over the years. She remembered moments of closeness and the once insignificant gestures that now seemed like precious memories of a happier past. As time went on, the revelations became more painful. Emily realized she had lost more than David's love, she'd also lost a part of herself, the part she believed to be good, worthy, faithful. Every time she saw David with Hannah, or heard his gentle tone with the children, she felt like a stranger, an intruder in her own life. The guilt was a constant weight, a persistent reminder of her failures. And she understood that it wasn't enough to want David's forgiveness, she also had to find a way to forgive herself. In a quiet night, sitting in the dark, Emily finally faced the reality: David was no longer hers. Hannah's presence proved that he had found a way to move on, a new anchor helping him heal from the wounds she had caused. He was rebuilding his life step by step, while she remained stuck in the past, caught in her error and regret. The next morning, David broke the silence. He called her into the living room to talk, his tone calm but firm, showing a kind of serenity Emily had never seen before. They sat across from each other on the sofa, but the space between them was much greater than a few inches. David looked into her eyes, and in that look Emily saw a sad compassion, a kind of forgiveness that wouldn't save their marriage but would set them free. In a controlled, quiet voice, David began to speak. He expressed all the pain he'd felt since the day he discovered her betrayal, his internal struggle to try to forgive her while seeking a way forward. He explained that Hannah's presence in his life wasn't just a distraction, but a new chance to build something he thought he had lost forever. He said that despite everything, he didn't hold a grudge, and deep down he hoped Emily would also find a way to move on and find peace, even if that meant a path separate from his. Emily listened in silence, each word hitting her hard. It hurt, but she knew this moment was a farewell, a final goodbye to what they once were. She wanted to say so many things, to explain her regret and her attempts to mend what was broken, but she knew no words would change what was now clear between them. There was no more room for excuses or pleas, only acceptance. When David finished, a long silence followed. They looked at each other, both aware that nothing would ever be the same after that instant. Emily felt a wave of emotions, sadness, relief, remorse, and above all a deep ache striking at her core. She knew David didn't hate her, but she also knew the love they'd once shared had been used up, consumed by the weight of lies and mistakes she couldn't undo. As he stood up to leave, David did one last thing. He stepped closer, took her hands, and with a sad smile said, "I hope you find peace, Emily." Those were simple words but filled with meaning. He was setting her free, setting himself free, letting her go so they both could look for paths leading to true peace. Emily felt one final tear roll down her cheek as she watched him walk away, knowing this was the definite end of the chapter they'd written together. After the door closed, Emily remained alone in the room. The emptiness around her seemed to mirror what she felt inside. But paradoxically, there was a clarity she'd never experienced before. She knew that this goodbye was, in a way, the greatest act of love David could have offered, letting her go so both of them could finally seek a way to find true peace. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.